The Iron Maiden is one of the most iconic and terrifying torture devices in popular imagination. It is typically described as a human-sized metal cabinet with spikes on the inside, designed to enclose a person and impale them when the door is closed. However, historical evidence strongly suggests that the Iron Maiden is not a genuine medieval torture device. Its origins are more myth than fact. The idea of an Iron Maiden appears to stem from 18th and 19th century fabrications. Though some people associate it with medieval or even earlier times, there are no documented uses or descriptions of such a device before the late 1700s. The most famous Iron Maiden, called the Iron Maiden of Nuremberg, was assembled in the early 19th century from parts of earlier artifacts. It was likely created as a museum attraction to sensationalize the cruelty of earlier ages. If the Iron Maiden had been real and used, its theoretical purpose would have been torture and execution. The victim would be placed inside the upright sarcophagus, and when the door was closed, spikes would puncture the body, but supposedly not fatally at first, allowing for a slow, agonizing death. Psychological terror, even if not used, the sight of such a device might have been used to intimidate or extract confessions. The dunking or ducking method originated in medieval Europe, but it became particularly prominent in England and colonial America during the 16th to 18th centuries. The device commonly associated with dunking was the ducking stool, a wooden chair attached to a long beam or lever mounted on a frame over a body of water, such as a pond, river, or lake. The person, usually a woman accused of a crime like scolding, witchcraft, or prostitution, would be tied into the chair and repeatedly submerged in cold water as punishment or testing. The idea dates back to Anglo-Saxon England, but its formal use and construction became standardized in the late medieval and early modern period. The dunking method had different purposes, depending on the accusation. 1. Punishment for scolds, gossiping or quarrelsome women. The ducking stool was often used as a public humiliation punishment. It was specifically designed for common scolds, women who were seen as disruptive, argumentative, or nagging. The punishment was not always fatal, but cold water, hypothermia, or drowning could occur. 2. Testing for witchcraft. In witch trials, especially in 17th century England and colonial America, dunking or water ordeal was used to test if someone was a witch. The logic: witches would float, because they rejected baptism, and innocent people would sink. If the accused floated, they were guilty and executed. If they sank, they were innocent, but often drowned anyway. This cruel paradox made it one of the most infamous tests in history. Famous victims. While most individual victims were ordinary women, a few cases stand out, especially from witch trials. 1. Elizabeth Proctor, Salem Witch Trials, 1692. Though not dunked, she was accused of witchcraft, and water-based ordeals were discussed during the Salem hysteria. Dunking was more common in Europe than in New England, but its spirit lived on in tests of guilt by water. 2. Women in East Anglia witch hunts, England, 1640s. Matthew Hopkins, the self-styled Witchfinder General, used dunking as a witch test. Several unnamed women were subjected to dunking, and some died during the ordeal. 3. Anne Royal, American case, 19th century, a famous early American journalist. She was allegedly threatened with ducking for being outspoken, though she was never actually dunked. The story illustrates how the reputation of the punishment lived on even after it was no longer used. The rack is one of the most infamous and feared torture devices in history, symbolizing the brutality of medieval and early modern justice systems. The origins of the rack date back to ancient times, possibly used by Greeks and Romans, but it became especially notorious in medieval Europe. The most well-documented and modern version of the rack appeared in England during the 15th and 16th centuries. It was often housed in dungeons, especially in places like the Tower of London, where it earned a reputation as the queen of torture devices. Design and mechanism. The rack consisted of a rectangular wooden frame with a roller or windlass at either end. The victim's wrists and ankles were tied with ropes. One roller was fixed, and the other could be turned using cranks or levers. As the roller was turned, the ropes tightened, pulling the victim's arms and legs in opposite directions. This would dislocate joints, tear muscles, rip tendons, and even break bones if extended far enough. The result was excruciating pain, and often lifelong mutilation or death. Purpose. The rack served several brutal purposes. 1. Extraction of confessions. Its primary use was to force confessions, real or false, from accused individuals. especially useful in religious or political trials where a confession was needed to justify execution. 2. Obtaining names of co-conspirators. Torture with the rack was used to gain information, such as names of alleged heretics, spies, or rebels. 3. Intimidation. The rack was often used to strike fear into prisoners, demonstrating the power of the church or the state. It was also a warning to others who might challenge authority. Famous victims. The rack was used across Europe, but England offers some of the most well-documented cases. Here are a few notable victims. 1. Anne Askew, 1521–1546, a Protestant martyr under Henry VIII. Anne was one of the only women known to have been tortured on the rack. Despite being of noble birth, she was tortured for refusing to name other Protestant sympathizers. She was so badly torn that she had to be carried to her execution at the stake in a chair. 2. Guy Fawkes, 1570–1606, famous for the Gunpowder Plot, a Catholic conspiracy to blow up Parliament in 1605. Fawkes was likely racked to extract the names of co-conspirators. His signature on his confession is barely legible, suggesting extreme physical trauma. 3. Nicholas Owen, d. 1606, a Jesuit lay brother who constructed secret priest holes to hide Catholic clergy. Arrested and tortured to death on the rack in the Tower of London. Canonized as a saint by the Catholic Church in 1970. 4. Edmund Campion, 1540–1581, a Jesuit priest caught returning to England during the anti-Catholic persecutions. He was tortured on the rack multiple times, then hanged, drawn, and quartered. The brazen bull, also called the bronze bull or Sicilian bull, is one of the most infamous torture and execution devices from ancient history, particularly associated with ancient Greece and Sicily. It was invented in Sicily, reportedly in the city of Acragas, modern-day Agrigento, during the 6th century BCE. The device is traditionally credited to Perilos of Athens, a metalworker who supposedly presented it to Phalaris, the tyrant of Acragas, as a new and horrific means of execution. The brazen bull was a life-size hollow bronze sculpture of a bull, with a door on the side. The condemned was locked inside, and a fire was lit underneath the bull. As the metal heated, the person inside would roast to death. The bull's head was designed with a complex acoustic system, turning the victim's screams into sounds resembling the bellowing of an angry bull, adding a theatrical and sadistic element. The brazen bull was designed to serve multiple gruesome and symbolic purposes. 1. Execution. It was primarily used as a form of capital punishment, an exceptionally painful and public way to kill enemies, criminals, or dissidents. 2. Terror and deterrence. Its horrifying nature and public display were intended to instill fear in the population. The bizarre transformation of screams into music was meant to mock the condemned and entertain the ruler and spectators. 3. Spectacle and propaganda. In tyrannical regimes, executions by brazen bull were used as political theater, emphasizing the absolute power of the ruler. It symbolized both punishment and the ruler's supposed control over life, sound, and spectacle. Famous victims. There are a few notable victims connected to the brazen bull, though some accounts blend history and legend. 1. Perilos of Athens, inventor, according to ancient sources, especially Diodorus Siculus. After Perilos presented the bull to Phalaris, the tyrant tricked him into climbing inside to demonstrate how the screams would sound. Once inside, Phalaris locked the door and lit the fire, not to kill him immediately, but to test the invention. He was rescued before death, only to be thrown off a cliff later, showing the tyrant's cruel irony and distrust. 2. Phalaris of Acragas. Though he was known for ordering executions by the brazen bull, legend says he was ultimately overthrown and executed in the same bull he used on others. This story may have been added later to symbolize poetic justice. 3. Christian martyrs. In later centuries, Christian hagiographies, saints' stories, claimed that early martyrs were burned alive in similar devices. Saint Eustace, a legendary Christian martyr, was supposedly executed along with his family in a brazen bull under Emperor Hadrian. Saint Antipas of Pergamon, according to tradition, was roasted alive in a brazen bull-shaped oven for refusing to renounce Christianity. The scavenger's daughter, also called the Skevington's irons, stalk, or Spanish a-frame, was a Tudor-era torture device invented in 16th century England. It was designed by Sir Leonard Skevington, the Lieutenant of the Tower of London, during the reign of King Henry VIII. The name, Scavenger's Daughter, is a corruption of Skevington's daughter, mocking the inventor by referring to the device as his offspring. It was likely created as a counterpart to the rack. While the rack stretched the body, the scavenger's daughter compressed it. The scavenger's daughter was made of iron and usually shaped like a metal A-frame or folding bar. The victim was forced into a crouching position. Their head was strapped down to the top, while their hands and feet were bound to the lower bars. The frame was then tightened or folded, crushing the body inward. Severe internal pressure, broken ribs and limbs, burst blood vessels, bleeding from ears, nose, and eyes, extreme pain and unconsciousness. In some cases, victims would vomit blood or suffer permanent injury from crushed organs or joints. The scavenger's daughter was designed for 1. Extraction of confessions. Like other torture devices, it was used to force confessions or information, especially during religious and political investigations. 2. Punishment of heretics and traitors. The Tudor period, particularly under Henry VIII and Elizabeth I, was filled with religious persecution. The device was often used on Catholic priests, Protestant dissenters, and political enemies. 3. Psychological intimidation. Even when not used, its mere presence in the Tower of London's torture chamber was meant to terrorize prisoners into talking. Famous victims. Although not as frequently documented as the rack or the brazen bull, a few notable victims of the scavenger's daughter are recorded, especially from the Tudor period. 1. Thomas Mere, Irish prisoner, 1581. A Catholic nobleman and suspected rebel, Mere was tortured with the scavenger's daughter in the Tower of London. He left an inscription on the wall of his cell in the Beauchamp Tower, which still survives today, Thomas Mere. Which leath here that he may be known to such as hereafter may chance to see this place. 1581. The most unhappy man in the world. He was not executed, but suffered severe physical trauma from the torture. 2. Catholic priests and Jesuit missionaries. Under Queen Elizabeth I, Catholic priests caught returning to England were seen as traitors. Many, such as Nicholas Owen and John Gerard, were tortured on multiple devices. While Gerard was primarily racked, others were compressed with the scavenger's daughter. Some victims experienced bleeding from eyes, ears, and mouths due to intense internal pressure. Hanging, drawing, and quartering was a method of capital punishment used in England for men convicted of high treason. It was first codified during the reign of King Henry III in the 13th century, and remained in use until the late 18th century. The earliest known sentence of this type occurred in 1283, when Dafydd ap Griffith, a Welsh prince, was executed under Edward I. It was exclusively used for men. Women convicted of treason were instead burned at the stake, considered more modest, to avoid public dismemberment. Hanging, drawing, and quartering was not a single act, but a ritualized sequence of tortures, often public, designed to maximize suffering and spectacle. Drawing, dragged to the execution site, the condemned was tied to a hurdle or wooden frame and dragged by a horse from the prison to the place of execution. This prevented the criminal from dying before arrival and publicly humiliated them. Hanging, partially strangled, the victim was hanged by the neck, but cut down while still alive, ensuring continued suffering. Disembowelment and castration. After hanging, the person was disemboweled, their bowels and genitals cut off and burned before their eyes. This was often done while the victim was still conscious. Beheading and quartering. The condemned was then beheaded, and their body was cut into 4 parts, quartered. The head and quarters were often displayed on spikes or city gates to serve as a warning to others. The entire process was meant to be brutally painful, humiliating, and serve as a political warning. The punishment had clear and deliberate purposes. 1. Deterrence. It was reserved for high treason, considered the worst possible crime, a betrayal of the king or country. Its extreme brutality was meant to frighten the population into loyalty. 2. Public spectacle. Executions were highly theatrical, held in public places like Tyburn or Tower Hill, and attended by large crowds. They reinforced the power of the monarchy and the shame of betrayal. 3. Shaming the traitor. The burning of genitals and mutilation were not just painful, they were deeply symbolic, meant to erase honor and masculinity. The display of body parts was a warning to others who might think of rebelling. Famous victims. Here are some of the most well-known individuals executed by this method. 1. William Wallace, 1305, Scottish hero and leader of resistance against English occupation. Captured and condemned by Edward I, he was hanged, drawn, and quartered in London. His head was displayed on London Bridge, and his body parts sent to various cities in Scotland. 2. Guy Fawkes, 1606, member of the Gunpowder Plot, a Catholic conspiracy to blow up Parliament and assassinate King James I. Fawkes was tortured, then sentenced to hanging, drawing, and quartering. He leapt from the gallows during hanging, breaking his neck, possibly to avoid the disembowelment. His co-conspirators were not so lucky, they were fully subjected to the punishment. 3. Thomas Armstrong, 1684, accused of conspiring in the Rye House plot to kill King Charles II and his brother, future James II. Captured and returned to England, he was hanged, drawn, and quartered, with body parts displayed publicly. 4. Edmund Campion, 1581, a Jesuit priest caught preaching Catholicism under Elizabeth I, accused of plotting against the Queen. He was tortured and then executed at Tyburn. Despite being a religious figure, he was treated as a political traitor.